Okay, here's a bottom line. What good is a great presentation? You can even have an amazing story and those wonderful points if at the end of the presentation, the audience is going, okay, so what do I do with what I just heard? All right, welcome to video number 3 on what? Asking the right question to get the right actions. Are you ready to review our SPA real quick? S stands for what? Stories. Stories are the what? The buy-in. Then after the stories you have the what? Point. Getting a great point, which creates what? Value. But after the story and after the point, you have this incredible thing called ask. Asking the right questions to get the right actions from your audience. I think the worst thing in the world is hear people, speakers or talkers, if you want to talk about that, asking questions that you don't want answers to. I think the worst thing in the world is you hear somebody get up in front of an audience and they start their speech like this. So, how's everybody doing today? How are we? Wow. Come on, man. You got to show a little bit more life. I'm not talking about personality, but don't ask questions that you don't want the answers to. I want to ask the kind of questions in my presentation that creates the kind of answers that's going to give the audience a sense of I've got to do something with what I just heard. You see, like I said before, I think it was in video 2, that the 2 most important parts of any presentation is how people feel when you first start. Of course, that's the story, the buy-in. It's that emotional connection that they're making with you as the speaker. But likewise, the most important part of any presentation is what? How you end that presentation. How do people feel? Not even necessarily think, but how do people feel when they walk away from hearing you? Do they feel like they want to hear just a little bit more? Asking the right questions, creating action points for your audience creates a desire in them to want to hear more of you. When I speak, one of the things I try to do over and over again is get people to do something with the material that I've given them. Here's an action point. Here's something you can do right now before you even leave the conference. Or I'll ask, what is one thing that you can take away from what you just heard that you can use in real life right where you work or right where you live? Because if I cannot understand what's going on to the point of doing something with what I just heard, what good is it? I've got to be able to do something. I've got to create an action for my audience that's going to say to them, this material is so good, it's so friendly that you can use it right where you work or obviously right where you live. All right, how do you create great questions? How do you create kind of questions that's going to get people to actually do something with the material that you just presented? One of the things that I try to do all the time in my presentations is put myself, you guessed it, right in the seat of the people who are listening to me. Do what I say is what I'm saying, the kind of material that they want to hear. So many times what I'll do is I'll record, like I'm doing right now, very unprofessionally, my presentation. And as I'm giving the presentation, I'm going through my points, I'm going through my stories, I will play back that presentation, listen to it, and go, okay, what are the questions or the actions that I should be pulling out of that presentation? I think one of the big mistakes speakers make is they have a hard time listening to themselves. I know that's a really hard one to swallow, but it's true. You ask any speaker, presenter, whatever, hey, when was the last time you listened to yourself speak? Many of them say, the last person I want to hear is myself speak. Of course, if they really do want to hear themselves speak all of the time, that might be another issue too. Anyway, that's another video. You have to edit yourself. You have to listen to yourself speak. That's why I try to get, wherever place I speak, get people to tape you. Get people to record what you're saying. Why? Not for sale, not so that you can put it in your repertoire, but that you can listen to it yourself from what? The audience's perspective. If you don't do that, you're kind of guessing at the kind of questions you're going to be asking them. So what I will do many times is listen to my presentations. And then when I do, I'll say, okay, that was a good point. Now, as a result of that point, what's the question I want to ask? Or, as a result of that point, what is the action that I'm trying to produce in my audience? Here's the other thing I want to say to you. When I come to the end of my presentation, one of the things that I really try to work on very carefully is to say, all right, what are the takeaways that you can have as you go back to the place you work or the place you live? So I will actually use the word takeaway, or what are some of the actions that you can take as a result of what you just heard? Now, if you're doing a PowerPoint, you might want to have 2 of those 3 things listed on your PowerPoint. It makes it an easy reference for the people to take something home with them. If they're writing, they're engaged. So you want to make sure that you're using PowerPoint in such a way just to present those action points. Don't read the material. Let them read it while you're what? While you're speaking. That's part of what I do in coaching when it comes to upcoming speakers. One of the things I really work on is how to get the power out of your PowerPoint. Okay, let me give you an example of a story, a point, and an ask. How does that flow? Let's go back to the Richard Simmons story, okay, which is one of my keynote signature stories. It's about going to the gym, working out with Richard Simmons, which is something I didn't want to do, but that my wife wanted me to do. What's the story? The story is what? Richard Simmons, working out with Richard Simmons. It's funny, it's hilarious, and it's engaging. Usually I use that story, usually for the beginning, the opening, or maybe the middle of my presentation. Now, we know the story's about Richard Simmons, working out with Richard Simmons. What's the point? Obviously, I don't want to be there. The point is, negative people don't want to be where they are. The point is fact that when people are negative about where they are, that spreads to everybody else. Okay, so we get the point. Now, I've got the story, and now I've got the point. What's the question I'm going to ask? I will ask something like this. How many of you here have ever been in a place you didn't want to be, but it was the place you needed to be? Now, obviously, a question like that is not going to have somebody raise their hand and me call on them and answer it. It's not that kind of question. And then really, I don't want that kind of response. The response I want is simply this. Oh yeah, I've been there. Maybe not raising their hands, but they're answering the question, what? Inside. It's a connection. So, how many of you have ever been in a place you've never wanted to be, but it's the place you needed to be? Those are the kinds of questions that people go, yeah. So then I'll say something like, the next question would be something like, what is one attitude that I could have changed to make everything different? Remember, I'm asking a question, and I didn't say, what attitude could you change in your life? No. I'm going to use me as an example of an action point. And then I'll say, well, here's one of the actions that I did as a result of being aware of my negativity. And then I'll mention what that is. And so when you ask questions, ask the kind of questions that require people to really think about what you just said. If you're going to use an example, use yourself as an example rather than pointing at the audience saying, how about you? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Say, here's some of the things that I have done. Using yourself as an example allows them to go, okay, yeah, that's me too. But it doesn't put them on the what? Of course, on the defensive. All right, so remember, Richard Simmons. The story is what? Richard Simmons' story. What's the point? Hey, I didn't want to be where I was. What's the question? What do you do when you're in a place you don't want to be, but it's a place you needed to be? Now remember, Everything I've given you in these last 3 videos are at 35,000 feet looking at this incredible thing called public speaking. If you want to go deeper, you can. And here's how.